Good evening, this is Jamie of the Druid Diaries. I'm sitting in front of a family mystery. I pulled this hand-hooked item out of the mud at my cousins Janet and Jean's farm. They had owned the farm with their brother who had passed away, and they were quite elderly. I think, in my early 20s at the time, and had gone there with my parents as Janet and Jean were selling off items from the farm, having a farm auction and sale. As they're getting on, they didn't feel they could handle the farm, and they wanted money towards their retirement. And we were in this old shed of a barn that had a dirt floor, and there were a couple of scythes hanging on the barn wall that I really badly wanted to buy from them. The scythes were very usable, but the handles were glowing with the hands that had held them and used them over these long, many years. And I suspect they may have even come from the UK with them overseas, or been purchased when they first got the farm. I don't really know, but they were gorgeous, and I was heavily involved with horses, and I also thought I'd probably one day have a practical use for them. My father protested vehemently that this was rather a morbid idea I had, and they were quite sharp and dangerous, and he, didn't even, I think, want to relocate them because they were my ride. And he really obstructed me in getting those items. And the ladies were chit-chatting, and I saw this peeking out from the mud, and I started to pull it out. I said, "What is this? This is really interesting. This is beautiful. What's it doing in the mud?" I know they had used it maybe to lay down across the mud to work on a vehicle in the shed, possibly something like that. Anyway, the point being, this gorgeous thing was buried, and it's just been peeking out. I yanked it out, and to their dismay, and in light of their protests, I think they were a little upset with me or embarrassed. They didn't maybe know how to react, and they just said to me, "Oh yeah, it's nothing, just leave it." You don't want that filthy thing. It's no good anymore. And they never told me anything about it, right? I wanted to look at all these symbols. It's just amazing. Look at this. Do you just put that as a random item on a border? Quite seriously, look at these. It's really fascinating what's on here. Look at that. The piece is a bit damaged. Honestly, it is. There's some bleaching out. There's some of the hooking is missing. And look. I know my video is a bit dark, but isn't this interesting? I suspect this was some kind of very significant item. And I really can't clearly identify all this. I mean, this one really stood out. This symbol right here. That's absolutely a symbol. And I think many of you will recognize it. So, I would love for people to comment if you recognize anything on here. If you have ideas of what this was actually intended to be originally, I would love if you would comment below. It is a family mystery, and there's nothing wrong with some mystery. I'm fine with that, but I also am fascinated, and I'm pretty sure that there may have been Masons on both sides of my family, and I wondered if this piece had anything to do with the Masons. I don't know. It struck me as an altarpiece of some kind when I first saw it, and I still have those kinds of feelings. There's something related to ritual. I don't know. I really don't know. You know, whether it was, well, had something to do with the Rosicrucians, as I know that my grandfather on the Watt side definitely had an uncle that was involved in something. Whether it was Rosicrucian or the Masons, I'm not entirely sure. But my grandfather did give me a small book, hardcover book, that was an introduction to the Rosy Cross, to the Rosicrucians path, that it was for members. And I was dismayed, absolutely dismayed at that. Really interesting. But families, you know, they keep their secrets. They don't always tell the next generation. And as I understand, that's fairly common with immigrant families. And I am a child of immigrants. And our one of our previous governments would still consider that I am an immigrant as well to Canada, because even though I'm born here, but because my mother was born in England, and all of my grandparents on both sides were all born in the UK. So, you know, to one particular past prime minister, that doesn't make me Canadian. Apparently, that even though I'm born here, I'm not Canadian because my lineage isn't quite long enough. I don't think that's actually the case anymore, but there are some laws around it, and it's a bit peculiar. But anyway, regardless, it's a bit of a family mystery, and a lot of times people that immigrate to a new country, they don't want to tell their descendants that much about the old country. Some are very proud and they absolutely want to preserve the culture and everything, but others are just the opposite. You're Canadian now, you know, or they have their stories may be too painful. You know, they may not want to burden you. And I think in my case, our family was maybe a bit secretive of their beliefs because they were trying too hard to make me a Canadian. And instead, they made me this benign sort of white Canadian without much identity. And that just doesn't work in a multicultural framework. It does not work because, you know, then it's an us and them. It starts to become, instead of all of us have lineage heritage is what we can be proud of and find interesting, and we're all in this together, then it sort of makes one group more established than the other. And I don't know. I have a lot of misgivings about that whole system. I just think every family, every individual has a story, right? And it's all equally important and it's all equally interesting. And diversity is the name of the game in a country like Canada. And I see nothing wrong with that. So, you know, I'm interested in my family's stories and lineage cultures and beliefs and the journeys they took. And this is part of the family's story and something I would find extremely interesting to have known about. But if I never do, it's still a gem. It's still a lovely piece with its weathered damage, and it has a story, a beautiful story. So, what do you think?